Welcome to AI Home Podcast, the first podcast for real estate resources and independent living strategies for the disability community. Why? Because accessibility is home. Hi, I'm Angela Fox, blogger, author, and your host. Now, let's begin. Welcome, everybody, for Accessibility is Home podcast. Again, this is Angela Fox, and I am standing in my accessible bathroom because at horizontalhouses.com, the business sponsoring this, we know that accessibility for housing is more than just the bathrooms. So for today's guest, I have the fabulous Mr. Griffin Benton from the Maryland Builders Association, and I'm delighted to have him as somebody that has been supportive of a wonderful legislation in Prince George's County, Maryland. He's going to be talking about that. And that's why I'm delighted to have him for International Day of Acceptance for Disability, which is on January 24th. Mr. Griffin, would you like to say hi to the audience and tell a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, my name is Griffin Benton. I work for the Maryland Building Industry Association, as you mentioned, MBIA. I'm really thrilled to be here. Really, I think that the podcast you have, what you're advocating for is awesome. I think it's really important. So excited to be here. I've been with the association now for about 5 years in a government affairs role, doing advocacy, covering the Washington, D.C. area primarily, but also statewide. 29 years old, from Maryland. Yeah, about me a little. I've worked in the political world now for almost 10 years, going back to turning down Annapolis. Cool to work in local government. You see a lot of the important things happen right in front of you versus more of the federal stuff. But I think this issue in particular is really important. So happy to be a part of it and on the podcast today.
Well, thank you, Mr. Griffin. I'm glad to have you on board. Can you tell the audience, because not everybody's going to be from Maryland listening, a little bit about the Maryland Builders Association and why it is so important?
Yes, MBIA, or the Maryland Building Industry Association, is a non-for-profit trade association. We represent about 1,100 member companies, give or take, here in the state. So it's a big group. And we have members who are builders, developers, associates, engineers, land use attorneys, land use folks, interior designers, roofers, tradespeople. It's a big group. It's not just home builders or developers that's in the name. It's a very large group of people who are involved with networking or whatever it may be, trying to drum up business, trying to also follow what's going on in the state. So it's a big group. It is a merger of two former associations that merged about 12 years ago now. That one was in Baltimore, one was in D.C., and that one was MNCBIA, which is the Maryland National Capital Building Industry Association. The other one was Maryland Just Building Association, which was a shorter acronym. But they merged in 2013 now, I guess it was, so maybe 10 years. But that's most of it. We advocate, obviously, for residential, primarily builders and developers on a slew of issues statewide. We're in pretty much every county, I think, except for 2 in Western Maryland and then a few in the Eastern Shore. But outside of that, we're very active, a little bit in D.C. as well. It's a big group. We're a chapter of the National Association of Home Builders, which is in Washington, D.C. We do have a federal arm as well. We also have HBCF, which is our Home Builders Care Foundation. So we do turnkey projects up to certain amounts for people who need anything from a minor fix in a home, or we've done something as recent as a men's shelter in Montgomery County that needed a new roof. So we have members who obviously can offer services, whether it's from the ground up or certain things, plumbing or windows or whatever it may be they need. It's a great organization. We're on defense a lot when it comes to legislation, but I think we do bring expertise that's important for policy being crafted and things like that. So we're always happy to resource. That's the gist of it in a nutshell. And there's a lot more to it, but
yeah, no, I really appreciate that. And I'm glad you mentioned the National Association of Home Builders, because I talk about that in some other episodes. You need to reach out to network. You might be a homeowner and need some assistance. And sometimes it's hard to find out what's going on at state or even in your county. I always recommend people reaching out to them because oftentimes state and county organizations are members of them. So I'm glad that you mentioned them. So
yeah, they're great for obviously, I think, some of the advocacy, but also just general information during COVID, especially. It was huge with stuff that people didn't know about or whatever it may be. It's a great source. And I think what MBIA also does is be a resource for information as well to members and those.
Yeah. It's always my first go-to if people want to know where to start. So I'm glad to hear. I'm glad to hear that the members. So I appreciate you explaining a little bit about the MBA, a little bit about who you are. But you talk about advocacy as a good part of your association. And I know that recently the Prince George's County passed the Universal Design and Visitability for Housing Act. And I know MBA came out in support of it. Would you like to talk a little bit about the legislation for our viewers and why MBA supported it?
Yeah, I think to give a little bit of history on this has been an initiative at the county now for a number of years, going back to a former council member who had spearheaded it. And we had actually been opposed to it, not because of the intent by any means or anything like that. We completely support what the bill was trying to do, obviously, and legislation is trying to do. It was more just the concerns we had about some of the requirements and mandates in there that were just a little bit extreme. I think some of the stuff with elevators and the cost and just generally how the timeline and when it was going to be implemented, I think we had concerns about, and we had a little bit of issue communicating, I think, where we could orchestrate those into making sure both sides, I think, can move forward. And the current sponsor, Councilmember Jolene Ivy, now Chair Ivy, I think really worked well with us. We went back and forth for 3 or 4 months going with some of our concerns, bringing knowledge and I think examples of where we have done this or seen this or challenges that we have with it. But I think that was a big part of it. And I think we ultimately support the intent completely. Sometimes we just think it's bad policy. We don't support a bill, whatever it may be. But this was like, look, we don't have an issue with what it's trying to do. I think the concerns came about trying to understand where the need is, obviously what the cost is, which is an important factor for members of ours who are for-profit builders, but on how it really is done. I don't know the extensive nationwide data on where this is in other states or counties or whatever, but it's undefined. It's not the same as ADA. There are certain things in there and what it kind of means to be universal design, those requirements met or designed for life standards. But so I think there's still a lot of data still to be collected and understanding what that looks like at a base level, added features, really everything they have on it. I think it's a good first step. There's a work group going on right now that I'm a part of along with other, stakeholders in the county. So I think we still have a couple of concerns in terms of a few things, but I'm hoping we can work those out prior to implementation in here in a couple of years and go from there. I think it's better to be on board and being able to support an initiative ultimately that you want to see happen, just making sure it's done right. I think we're on the right track for sure. And I think Prince George's County is going to lead the way in doing this the right way. And hopefully other counties follow, other states follow, and go from there.
We all hope. Now, my understanding, and of course I'm from outside looking in, is that the act, which is, again, for our listeners, is a county, Prince George's County, not the full state of Maryland.
Nope.
But it's starting in 2026. Is it 50% of accessibility for like single family homes?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about it. So you're correct. It is 2026 is the start date, I guess you could say. And correct, up to half of community or a project, a set number of homes need to meet these standards that are in legislation. There is a waiver component, which part of our concerns in the work group is sort of how DPI, in this case, the Department of Permitting Services, will administer that program. If you have a waiver, what it means. I think some of the concerns there are just the administration process, which a lot of the time, not to go too much there in some of these bills, is how it's actually implemented. It's not really the policy, it's how the county carries it out. And it's not always as easy as saying, okay, this is in effect, do this. So correct, that's the basis of it. And there are some exemptions for certain product types, townhomes and 2/2s on the outside. There's still
that's what I totally remember.
On the interior that you have to meet. And some of the zero-step entry is what we're trying to work on now. I think ultimately, in most cases, it's achievable to some extent, given, what you can do with grading. But on large communities in particular, especially for single-family detached homes, it's harder for large communities to every house have zero-step entry walkway, given just topography or stormwater runoff or whatever it may be, which I think we're trying to find a happy medium with the sponsor and others to see where that works out. But you're correct in kind of the timeline and what it looks to, what it would capture right now and going from there. I think other counties, you mentioned one just real quick in Montgomery. I know think they have Design for Life standards where you get certain credits, but it's not a requirement at this point. So.
Yeah, I will say that I'm thrilled that the legislation is actually called Visibility. It's actually Universal Design and Visitability. Because for our viewers, visibility was actually a movement, like a watered down version of universal design. And it started out in the 70s. And there are a few states that have passed legislation that required basically 3 things as part of visibility. One would be zero entryway was one of them for single family homes. Half bathroom on the main floor with door access 32 inches, and then also a room. So that way, the whole concept of visibility, I've talked a lot about this, but for those who are just listening now, it's this idea that you don't just look at the home as to who will be living in, but who will actually might come and visit. And so having be able to, like for me, wheel in to use the bathroom and having a room in case you need to stay at night. So visibility movement's been around for a couple decades now. And there have been some states that have actually passed that legislation, but that's a much watered down version of universal design. But it is a step forward. And there's a lot of great resources for all you listeners I have it on my website that talk about zero entryway and how more cost effective if you build it while you're doing it. And actually they broke it down how much it actually costs, which is significantly very little. And so it's exciting, but that's just 3 or 4 things. And this Universal Design Act includes that, but includes more. Do you have anything more? I know the legislation is broad, but what are some things that will be included outside of what I just said about potentially zero entry? Has anything been defined yet?
There are some of the stuff you mentioned obviously is in there, but there are some additional requirements for things like electrical outlets, rocket switches, more accessible access for having to reach or for, level if you are in a wheelchair so you don't have to get up or extend yourself for certain just if you're sitting in a given room. There's around some of the, I think for wheelchair accessible around the kitchen areas, there's more wider lengths, the exact number, 38 or 40, but it's 42, but it's in there as well. The first floor full bed is what they're looking at now, having the ability to have a first floor full bedroom, which is a little bit undefined. Obviously, per Maryland code, it does require a window, a separate door. So it's not like I guess it could be like a den, but you'd have to have a closed off door in the sense. And then the first floor full bathroom is a little bit different. That would include the zero step entry shower, rail bars, things like that. So that's a little bit different, I think, than what typically was the half bath. But also, and there is a electric stair chair ready if you have the ability to, need a stair chair at some point.
That's great.
That's in there, it's really important. I think a lot of that now, the widths of the staircase are now required to be a little bit wider, but I do know in talking to some builder members, that's a given already. In some cases, given because you see that more commonly. But off the top of my head, it still is relatively vague, to be honest. I think a portion of the bill, a large portion of it is sort of the administrative process on the waiver and what requirements you have to meet based on percentages. I think we're going to hopefully get more of it defined, but I think a big part of this is more data collection. I think we're trying to get an understanding of what new homeowners, current homeowners want to see or what maybe need more than others. And I understand you avoid having to do major retrofitting costs or things like that, which is always problematic. But I think in talking to some folks about this, it's just not as commonly seen in some cases, but it's different on each case. Someone maybe I've heard of someone having MS or someone is wheelchair bound or someone just has a weight issue, something like that, where certain things are needed versus I need all this. So it is a little bit more a la carte versus the full scale of I need all this, but it's important to make sure I think that things are accessible or you need it without having to do major renovations to a home. And also aging in place. Sorry, I'm going to carry on here, but that's a big, I know, thing people want to.
A lot of people get confused, like what's aging in place and what's universal design, and the concept of reason why I do this podcast, as like you and I talked offline, was the concept of disability home ownership. What is that? People are like, oh, I didn't think about it. And honestly, it's just the degree. It's how I break it down to people and who is asking for it. That's probably, I don't know about you, probably the simplest way of explaining it. I tell people that the Americans with Disability Act does not apply for private sector housing with OSS 4 units or more, and that's a Fair Housing Act, and that's before the ADA, so you can imagine what's required of that. So basically, that's why this legislation at the county level and other states is such a big deal, because it's not a national requirement. But on the positive side, when you don't have legislation, you have the freedom to voluntarily do things if it's not required. And a lot of disability organizations are creating their own code, as I call it, of this is what we would like to have, knowing it's voluntary. And based on a lot of research, Kelsey out in California, they wrote a 120-page book. And I really like how they do it because they don't focus on everything that you need to have. What they do is they focus on the major disabilities, not the diagnosis. And I think that's one thing I always tell people. Saying you have MS doesn't really mean anything. What do you need? Because chances are what you need, a entirely different disability may also, or aging in
Yeah.
place. So there's a lot of overlap. And so this book, and I'll send it to you, does
Yeah.
that. And they break it out by room, and it feels a little overwhelming. It's not an easy read, but it's a very comprehensive, and it doesn't get into kids a laundry list of all the
Right.
disabilities. It's more of hearing impaired, visually impaired, mobility impaired, neurodivergent, things like that. There are a lot of organizations. There's another organization in Virginia that also is doing that. So it is an exciting time, and there are a lot of resources. Again, it's voluntary, it's not legislative, but it is an exciting time. I could just feel the progress already.
Yeah, no, I'd appreciate it because I think I'm curious to learn a lot more about it. I think one of the things we had initially come to the table with, was mandating the option to offer a set of standards on a home, have in a model home for, say, what this looks like. And to your point, a little bit about the specificity needed for a given person. And I understand it's probably ideal to say, look, this is going to try and we're going to then, based upon X amount of people who have something, we want to try and do this, is what the goal is long term to have that. But yeah, it does vary. I heard one example of someone had a history of some kind of arthritis in the family or whatever, where they couldn't easily, and it wasn't a diagnosis per se, but it was like, hey, I can have this one day. I don't know. I'm planning to live here. It's better prepared. But yeah, no, I'd appreciate it because I do think it's a vast amount of things. It's not just one or two or three. Hey,
Right.
you're wheelchair bound or you're disabled or you're whatever in this case, or I think it goes beyond that for sure.
And now a quick break from our sponsor. So as you can see and also hearing me, I am sitting on my back deck and I have my grill. I love being out in my back deck. I hate when I forget something and I have to wheel back into the house, particularly my cell phone. However, I'm excited to announce that another disabled owned business, Cush Pocket, has come up with a solution by creating this fabulous wheelchair bag. I love this bag and have been a proud customer since almost the very beginning. Why do I like it? One, it's huge. Two, it comes in multiple colors. But three, you can put it anywhere on the base of your wheelchair. How does that happen? It's attached to the flap and it has little Velcro. You put it directly underneath your cushion of your wheelchair. And the Velcro and the weight of your body ensures that this fabulous Cush Pocket bag, it certainly will not move. I personally have two directly in front of me and it hides behind my legs, and I love that because it's so much more convenient. Trust me, you will never forget anything ever again. So as you can see down below, I have a direct link for Cush Pocket, and if you use my code Angela Fox, you will get $1 off. And not only will you get a fabulous bag, but you'll also support two disabled owned businesses, Cush Pocket and my business, Horizontal Houses. Check it out. It does. I've been disabled since I was born, so 41 years before the internet was really big. I was around, but
Right.
CompuServe, okay? I literally had to reinvent the wheel all the time, and I was born
Yeah.
before the 88. And unfortunately, and I say anybody who's been new to the disability community listening, or those who may be working like realtors, housing developers, is that a lot of us are not born with being disabled. So when you become disabled, it's new to you, right? It's new, it's dramatic. And so you tend to think you have to reinvent the wheel because people you talk to are not disabled. You were not born disabled. And so you tend to
Sure.
think about what you need, which is totally understandable. And then just figuring that you have to reinvent the wheel. So I always encourage people not only to reach out to me and my company and the podcast and everything, but a lot of Facebook groups, and just put up what I call the bat signal, put a little post, and you will get somebody that has an answer. And so you don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel. And I think that is my takeaway for housing developers and anybody working in the home builders, is be mindful of that if you're talking to the disability community. Obviously you don't want to grill them and say, how have you been disabled? Not encouraging, that's invasion of
Oh yeah. No.
privacy. But at the same time, be mindful of it's still new, and it's really reaching out to the disability community is really important and will often overlook. And there will be somebody, as I just mentioned, the organizations really trying to look at it as a holistic and not just an individual disability. I appreciate that. But
No, and I think a lot of the time, just real quick, I think a lot of the cases I've heard of, or examples at least, and that's one of the things too. In talking to just everything from a small time custom type person to a nonprofit to a large track builder, it is typically consumer. They need these things, and it's something they need to do. The builder needs to, which they'll always do to accommodate, obviously. I think it's typically that at least something that I've seen has been, hey, I need these things in my new home, or I need this, for at least new construction. That would be talked. Yeah.
And that's part of the consulting that my business does, to try to have how you work through that and everything, because it really is, unfortunately, still not new. Like I said, there's a lot of things been going around, but it's still new territory for a lot of people. But hopefully that helps you and other individuals. Because I know it can be a lot. It can be a lot. We have other trainings too. But going into the impact of this particular legislation for PG County in Maryland, how do you believe this new act will impact the housing market? Any ideas?
So it's a good question. And frankly, we've talked about a little bit ultimately regarding the sort of data on this in terms of just, it's been more one-offs. It's been more some homes in a larger community, or some a project by having someone does this. But I think if anything, it's obviously, I think, going to be a positive long-term. I think it's better to say, look, Prince George's County is doing universal design. They're having these standards in place already, new construction. A family moves there, whoever moves there and may need this or has family members, it's better to have that in place than not, I think, ultimately. So there is a concern on the price side always, and I don't mean to talk about that, but obviously the cost of construction in general is rising. So I think you start doing certain things and it does in some way affect the bottom line. I don't know to what extent that is right now, but we've talked about it, I've heard different numbers and things like that. So that there's always a concern there, but I think the more amenities you can have or offer in a home is better. So I think the effect is positive, and I think to be more inclusive as well of people. And you mentioned disabled home ownership, or I apologize if that's incorrect of how that's said, but
that's why I call it kind of thing. So,
it really is, and I think in general, anybody's looking at it doesn't matter who the customer is. It does not. And I think if you can offer to expand your potential customer base, not to sound like just all about business, it's better.
No, it's important.
It's the fact that yourself being in a wheelchair is no different from me who can whatever. You do everything, you pay whatever. There's no difference. I think looking at it from that perspective, it's a benefit. Not even to mention just what you already going to have, the amenities and the things that's going to bring people to be more inclusive, but it's a larger market, just to put it like that. I think if you want to be just breaking it down, it's better to have a larger pool of the people who could buy a home potentially or whatever.
I love you said that, because I always say in every podcast, and if my people are tired of me hearing it, I'll still repeat myself. Disability is the largest minority in the United States. It's 25% of the population. And one thing I love my nonprofit organizations with all my heart. And they are right that a good chunk of that is low income.
Yeah.
However, if based on the population of disabilities, the portion that's not low income, now middle and above, is about the same. This is 2010 census. It's about the same population as all African Americans. Now, the problem is that with the nonprofits, when they're trying to help those who need the help the most, they are right. We have the largest low income of all minorities. And that's absolutely right. But the problem is when you keep saying that, and if that's the only statistic, when I'm talking to people in the business, they'll say they're not going to buy houses. They're low income. And I will say, it's a higher percentage. But the people who are not low income, it's just about the same, give or take 5% of African Americans. And when we're talking about African Americans, we consider them consumers of buying homes.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter race. Yeah,
it doesn't matter. It all is based on your perspective and what the data is. I encourage people to look into as a business because it's really important. One question I have for you that I've not been able to find, and maybe you just don't know right now, but appraising a home, because at the end, you build this, you have the cost of actually building it, but at the end of the day, how much is it going to appraise so you can sell it? And the homeowner will want to know, can I have equity, the multi-generational wealth? That's why a lot of people get houses, not just for shelter. As far as appraising homes with universal design, is there any guidance for that out there? I have not been able to find it.
So to this point, no. More one-offs, certain things you do that may be a part of universal design as a whole, sure. But as an actual maybe category, if you will. And I
Yeah.
compare this a little bit to, I think appraisal as a whole being a little bit behind, a step or two behind where we are with houses today. If you talk to somebody who has a green home or a net zero home or really energy efficient home, it's still not appraised correctly because of the utility bills that it saves you over what they look like on a monthly basis or whatever. There's getting there, but I've talked to different people about training and things like that. And it's in certain cases, sure, but I think as across the board as in the industry there, no, I don't think it is at this point. I think
Okay.
certain aspects are, but understanding what universal design does and how it adds value to a home in multiple ways, I don't think has been formally known right now, if I have to
Okay.
say. And I think to your point just earlier, really quickly about, I think the African American, I think some of that, Prince George's County is a primarily African American county. It's a wealthy, so I think for this to be there, I think you will have a lot of folks who are minorities. It's going to
Yeah.
be an interesting mix of people there. So I think, look, I don't think it matters. There's, you want to buy a home to anybody. It doesn't matter if they're
Yeah.
African American, white,
Yeah.
disabled,
Yeah.
not. There's a huge consumer base potentially. So
There is. It is.
yeah,
And just trying to get people to realize that people who are disabled are employed and they
Yeah.
kind of are self-efficient and,
taxes do everything. It's
money to
not
be
like,
made, right?
yeah,
And I don't
yeah.
tell any housing developer to
They want
do
the same
everything
things
but
as my
universal design, right? You
same
got
things
to
that a person.
diversify.
I agree with you 100%, and you want the same things that person who is whatever does want. There isn't much difference in terms of I think desires and wants in a home and what people like to have. So
Yeah,
I think
there's
for
a
that,
lot of overlap and just trying to
sure,
get that hurdle. Now, yeah, I do know that Fannie Mae Mac is revamping the appraisal, something with the appraisals process, and I'm trying to look
okay,
into that. And they're actually including, what do they call it, for utilities, eco-friendly,
yeah,
and that's the push to add that. But at this point, they're not including universal design because there's some overlap between a lot of the eco stuff. For example, a quick example, not saying it's going to happen at PG County, but solar panels and having the ability to have electricity is really important for me because I'm an electric wheelchair. That's just a very simple sort of a little bit overlap, and not everything, obviously, but I do know that Fannie Mae Mac is trying to revamp their appraisal process, but I don't know anything beyond that.
a lot of it's part of state by state. They're doing certain climate solutions acts, things of that nature to get
Yeah.
trying to incentivize people to be more efficient, which makes sense. And your point about solar panels and other things, as far as even banning natural gas in new construction, things of that nature. So
Mhm.
it's pretty extensive. But yeah, I think universal design, and I mentioned earlier the word kind of category, understanding what that looks like in a given home is still working, but it happens maybe at a slower pace, but it's happening. I would hope, but it's a good point. I think on the appraisal side is something that needs to get a little bit more up to speed with where the industry is. I feel like they're behind with whether it's they don't have enough appraisers as a whole or the education's not there or what, but I feel like I hear often about we're not on the same playing field in terms of what homes look like nowadays. There's this, not to get off on my rant here, but you mentioned climate. So new
Yeah.
homes are very efficient and there's this
Yeah.
constant push to regulate them more. And frankly, I don't know if it's a misunderstanding of kind of what a new home looks like from an energy output and all this, but it's much more efficient at home even 10 years ago, a new home today, or obviously 2030. Point being is that I think about identifying what homes are like today and what they have in them, the resiliency of them from an energy standpoint, but also your point about how they can accommodate everybody is still not there, which needs to change.
I think it's just a matter of finding the value that consumers want. And I
Yeah.
was reading the NAHB, National Association of Home Builders, a 2021 or 2020 survey, and they asked about energy efficiency. And most consumers only wanted it, like when you just ask the question, it didn't rank very high. But when you could prove that the utilities will be lower, then they
Sure.
started to wanting to have that. And I just say that because that's how universal design, in my opinion, should be the approach. You mentioned earlier about aging in place and somebody worry about having arthritis. The number one safety issue for the senior citizens are falling in the home. And there's a lot of disabilities, and so be able to not have as many steps and things like that. And so I think health insurance company has been all kinds of data about the fact that, and we saw that in COVID, right? That if you put individuals in nursing homes and other facilities, that really is not that much more economic. They thought it would be. And they're finding out that really having the individual stay in the home, the health will last 5 years longer before an additional symptom will occur.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, I think, advocates for the business. I'm all about business. I think it's a great social movement, but working with health insurance companies and to get them on board that, hey, if you don't want to pay, because nursing homes are expensive,
Oh,
and no
yeah.
one wants to be in a nursing home. I
Oh,
don't
yeah.
care.
No.
No one wants to be there.
No,
I'm
and your
sorry.
point, I think we're seeing also a lot now, at least in some parts on 55 or greater communities. You're seeing individual resident, and look, they're not saying cheaper, but you are seeing a trend, and I know that kind of goes against the aging in place, but there is a safer model. And I'm just saying we are seeing more of these age restricted communities that are popping up and being even blended into larger for any age communities. There's one example in our county called Two Rivers and others, but no, I agree. Yeah. It's a hotbed for catching something or getting sick or expand.
Yeah.
It's just not, you don't want to be there, obviously.
Ironically, there was a legislation called the Olmstead, not legislation, I'm sorry, Supreme Court case called the Olmstead. It was in
Yeah.
1995. And that really was what we call the desegregation of the disabilities. Independence Day was when the ADA was passed in 1990.
Yeah.
And then 1995, surprise, people were still institutionalized, right? And I won't get into the details. I am a lawyer, so I get all geeky on it.
No, I appreciate it.
Yeah, but it basically two individuals with mental disabilities voluntarily went into a facility and they got help and they were going to leave after I think a year. And the doctor said, what we provide you here is not available in your community or in close by. And so we will not discharge you. And so these two individuals who voluntarily went into this facility, this institution, were stuck there for many years, got out, but had to go up to Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court has said that no part of the ADA is that whatever you offer in a facility should be within the community. And that otherwise you are institutionalizing and going against the spirit of ADA. But
Yeah.
that happened in 1995. Yeah. It's ironic that still health insurance companies still required to get around the clock care paid for to go to a nursing home.
Right.
As it's, anyways, I won't get too much more on
And
that.
in some cases for that regarding insurance, I don't know enough about it in this case, but the level of the facility type isn't
Mm-hmm.
always going to be a top tier unless you have out of pocket you can pay. I'm sure it's not. It's
Yeah, traditionally, if you're not low income on Medicare and you're not in a nursing home, having people come in and help you dress and things like that is not covered by most insurance.
interesting.
That's why it's really challenging. I always say that the working class disabled is forgotten in a lot
Yeah.
of how things
Yeah.
are made. And so that's why housing is such an important thing to me because I have an extra room. So if I want to have a nursing student, free room and board to be around me when I'm at that age, I will do. And so housing is really a big part, a big problem. And if you're renting an apartment, you can have things adjusted, but you have to pay for it. And
Yeah.
you also have to pay for it to be removed. Again, having a house to do that one-time cost is another reason why. I could go on to many reasons why housing and homeownership is so crucial for those who are severely disabled because the health insurance and
Oh, yeah.
other things do not address it. And large part of that is, I hate to say health lobbyists a little bit. And also historically, the family is considered to have to take care of the family.
Yeah.
And that goes back to the industrial solution. But that's a little bit of history about that. It
No, I
used to be-
appreciate it.
Yeah.
It's a really good point you bring up, frankly, about just if you don't have kind of the ownership aspect and you're just forced to then have to rent or do whatever and move around and out of your own pocket pay for accommodations or trust me, I don't know this, but I imagine it adds up very quickly. And it's good luck getting insurance companies.
Yeah, International Mobility Magazine did an article, and it's with severe disabilities, and now that's a vague term, but for severe disability, it's 15% more expensive for cost of living.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And I think it's
and,
high.
and I mean,
I
you
think
talk
it's
about
higher.
even transportation costs and trying to get around. It's just everything is. Yeah, no, it's a really interesting point you bring up. I appreciate that.
And having equity in your home, that way you can use it for a low interest loan versus your credit card. And at renting your house, there's a great website called Becoming Rental Ability. And it's all about those who, it's like an Airbnb.
Sure.
for homes with Universal Design. It's a fabulous company that I know, and we run in the same circles. You can make money off your house besides the equity. You can rent it out, right? So there's so many reasons why. And all of that is just like everybody else, right? So going back to what you said earlier. But one question, we talked about appraisals for the legislation. And I know you talked about training might be an issue with that. You talked about the consumer, the cost, the housing developers
Sure.
concerned about the cost. I totally understand that. What tools or resources do you think are needed to help these housing developers or realtors?
So from when you say resources, from making it like known to the public that it's available,
It
or
could be that. I just, what your perspective, because it is new,
yeah,
and you hit a point about there's not a lot of data out there.
but
But
it's a really good point you bring up. And I think frankly, yourself, people like yourself and others who have been advocates for the disability community as a whole. And I think understanding the challenges that you go through is going to be how we get there. I think ultimately you have to have, obviously data is important. I don't, but that can
yeah.
be done from experience in building homes and all these things that you just understand and
Mhm.
do. And you've been around, you're doing it for a long time. But I do think with something like this, you need people who are stakeholders from obviously they are disabled or they've experienced
Mhm.
it or they own a home and what they've had to do to their home. So I think that's how we get there. I think from the county, I think the county is going to really needs to be crystal clear on kind of what is expected, what is required, what's needed, how it's going to be some growing pains. It's going to be a process, but I think we're in the right sort of spot where we're together and what needs to be done and what we see. But
Mhm.
I think it's going to take some time on the education front. You mentioned appraisers and even builders and developers of how to build these, what's done, what's needed on a given site or a parcel from a grading perspective, whatever, all these things.
Yeah.
It really does get in the weeds a little bit, but I think it's just going to be sort of repetition and then also working with folks like, again, I mean, I bring up you and others who
Mhm.
have knowledge of this and have
Mhm.
a big interest and knowledge of kind of what this is and how it needs to look and what that may be. You always have people
Yeah.
who are like, I don't want this or that. Things we're
Not in
seeing
my
on this.
home, not in my neighborhood, right?
Yeah, exactly. One of the
Yeah.
things we're seeing right now is regarding electric vehicles. There's a big push now to
Yeah.
mandate all new homes having not necessarily the charging unit, but having the plug-in cable, which costs a couple hundred more dollars, and having
Mhm.
this. And now you have to upgrade that. It's a brave new world for housing on the idea that it's multiple different things you now need to do that do add to cost, but housing as a whole right now, we have a major housing shortage. And I bring up this because you mentioned affordability, accessibility. It's not just affordable housing, it's workforce housing, it's market rate housing. You can't do one without the others. This particular upcoming legislative session at the state level starts next week. The governor is really going to be pushing housing. So I think a lot of the stuff related to housing and maybe I think on universal design should start being talked about how that looks. Prince George's County is doing this. How's it going after a year, six
Yeah.
months? What does it look like? What are the pain points? So I think a lot of this is going to be, it's going to be in my opinion, to put a number on it, it's going to be a 15 to 20 year process to see how it really plays out and what
Yeah.
people need and and I may be shorter, but that's a reasonable figure. It's not going to be over a year or two or
Oh,
five
no.
years. So that's a long way of answering your question, but I think there are a lot of different things right now in housing that are it's changing, put it that way, in terms of how you build it, how you develop for
Mhm.
it, the types of housing people want, what they need. And even just over a couple of year period, it's been since COVID, really, it's been interesting. And now people are working from home and spending
Yeah.
a lot more time in their homes.
Yeah. And that's
So
one of my big thing is we learned a lot in COVID that
yeah, it's
a
different.
house is more than just a shelter. It
Oh,
became
yeah.
where you taught your kids. It became, where you worked. It became a gym. And it's kind of ironic because the disability community, we know, I always tell people the reason why I'm so passionate about this and why I focus is that the world is still not accessible. So your home should be your oasis away from that.
Yeah.
And it's the only spot in the planet that you can control. If you own your house, with some exceptions, you can make it. Now, I disencourage it just retrofitting. My father's an engineer, so he always did things. And as
Yeah.
I've gotten older, I said, no, it's got to be functional for me and others. And he's like, why? It's just you. And I'm like, it's got to look pretty. And he goes, why? I go, because you're actually lowering the value of my home by not doing that.
Plus, you
Uh,
want that. I want
yeah,
to have things
yeah,
that
and
it
that's
doesn't
another
matter.
thing. We don't want anything institutional.
Yeah,
It's
it's like
beyond just function. We like form too.
that's the point I'm getting at is that you have the free. It's yours. I don't if it's ugly or really, it's my choice.
And that's why
So
you have a house, right?
yeah,
That's why everybody has it. But I always try to think of bottlenecks in the process. And oftentimes when there's a good tenant, they'll do, if you build it, they will come. for the movie. That's not necessarily true if you don't focus on the players and you don't reach out to the disability community. I know we've got that. Is it a board? What's it called?
Oh, it's design work group or task force, I guess. It meets once a month on the second Wednesday. That's the frequency of it. It's a group of about 10 folks who from Habitat, from smaller affordable builders and architectural folks, someone from the county executive's office, obviously, and then the sponsor and another council person. I believe it right now. There's a few others. There's some I'm missing, but we've met once.
Are there any realtors or realtor organizations?
Yeah, there is a realtor on there. I don't know if the actual like realtors, like the Association of Realtors, has a seat on there, but there was a realtor. There was someone from the city of 2 municipalities in Prince George's County are on there as well are also pushing this. I think it's a town of Brentwood and somewhere else, but I apologize. Top of my head, I don't have it. I can get back.
No, I just wonder. Yeah. Okay. A big bottleneck, right? You could build these houses and it's going to be the realtors that are going to be selling or working with the disability to find the homes. That's all. It's just
so that's right. And that's, I think, where I do wonder. Yeah, I'm curious on kind of that whole aspect about when you come to an area, the research you do when you come to it. What are you obviously look for a buildable plot of land, but I think when you do the sort of market factors, obviously near transit or near shopping or schools, everything that you factor in, what does the disabled population look like in that given area? And how does that look? I don't know how exactly, but I'm not saying that's a fact, but you do wonder that given what this legislation looks like now and how you accommodate for that and how you reach out. Because I think it's gonna add something new. It's gonna change.
Yeah, unfortunately, because I will tell you, disability is awfully not collected in a lot of demographic information.
Right, and I don't. Yeah. I don't know how
exactly and so it's tough with consulting is you really look at generally, again, what not just in your location, because I tell you what, people will move to accessible, affordable housing. If it's by transport, so the number one thing is access to medical and then housing are the top 3 things because you need transportation to get to your medical. Your housing will prevent future medical and you can work from home now in theory. So that's why in the top 3 things, that's the order.
Not schools?
No, because you're talking about the disability community. It's employment and then schooling. And a lot of people become disabled much later in life. So they may already have education.
Right.
And we're not talking about education for your children. We're talking yourself. That obviously schools might be important if you have children, which we do. But for yourself. Right. But for yourself, most people become disabled in the mid 40s or later. So in theory, you will have that training and that, only about it's rising. Only about 5% are disabled before the 27th birthday.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And disabled, and just curious, that the definition of it in this case, not definition, but you know what I'm saying, like the spectrum, what it looks like. The
ADA, following the ADA line. Yeah, that's the criteria. And the reason why also for those who are on Social Security disability, there was the ABLE Act passed, which allow you to have $15,000 or more in a savings account without affecting your Social Security disability, or if you become disabled before your 27th birthday. As a federal tax defer account. Yeah, that it was a compromise between the Republicans and Democrats. They wanted to include all disabled regardless of your Social Security disability. And the compromise was you don't have to be on Social Security, but you have to be disabled for your 27th birthday because they knew only 5% did. So, yeah, it gets a little bit more complex. And I always tell people, but yeah, I know I am looking into doing more trainings and things like that with realtors and the appraisal things. I'm on the back end because I know even when I talk to the disability community, it's a new thing for them. It's just new. And we all have to work together and figure out a way of treating it like you do in other market aspects, if that makes sense.
It does. No, you're right. It's adding in sort of what you need to look for and point out and also try and offer to a given customer, as a matter of whether whoever you're going to be dealing with in that case. No, it's an interesting point you bring up about what is needed for a given area. You mentioned obviously employment, housing, and transportation being the 3 big factors for the disability community. And I just wonder what that looks like in Prince George, what the types of people are, whether it's a single person or a family, whether it's just a spouse. I'm curious if they have children. That's what I think it's going to be interesting to kind of see what it looks like.
A lot of individuals who become severely disabled, who are married, when you talk to them on the back end, everybody knows they get divorced because the incomes together, they can't get a lot of service because they're no longer low income.
Okay, interesting. So the reason for divorce is actually to get better medical care?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know that.
A pretty big thing. So I would guess they can't say that because it could be precarious, but yeah, that's the underlying thing, especially if the state still allows divorce to live in the same house. And so you'll see them divorced on paper, but
They still live together, and interesting.
I'm not giving legal advice and everything
No,
happens.
totally.
But yeah, so I would gather that you would see that, and there'll be more data on the elderly and children, but the in between is often overlooked because they're not low income.
So let me ask you, I guess in your experience, sorry, I don't mean to flip I know
No.
but I'm curious, the types of builders you've seen build universal design type
Mhm.
units or houses or whatever,
Mm.
are they specialized types? Are they large scale? Are they net? What's your experience been with that? Just curious.
I know where a large senior population is at, aging in place with a little bit of universal design added to it is primarily what I see.
Okay.
And in fact, a lot of people don't realize that aging in place and universal design is almost one and the same. But they market it as aging in place. That's
the
why I get
semantic
big into
changes.
it, right? They market it as aging in place, and then I'll talk to them and be like, "Why'd you add this and add that?" They're like, "Oh yeah, we could." And what I'm suggesting is just universal design stuff
It's
to
almost like
make
a
it.
weird kind of loophole. You start having different sort of terminology for what you're doing here. It's like, wait, so this is not that,
And
but it
that's
is.
what I struggle with. That's what
Good
I
point.
struggle with.
Because we just in this conversation I've had, not with you, but since universal design, I've heard obviously design for life. I've heard universal design, I've heard aging in place, ADA being separate, obviously different just things that come into it. And you're like, wait, what are we still talking about? Is it this? Is it that? Is it not including this?
And that's why I'm all about the marketability. Because if you get down to the marketability,
Right.
with a little bit of the social justice aspect to it, because that
Sure.
certainly is a part of it, when you start doing that, it doesn't become so much about what you know. It's more about the objective, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So
No,
that's what I really try to do, but it's hard. I've been accused of being elitist and a few other things because I'm not focused on low income housing, but low income housing is needed. It's not enough, but this whole disability home ownership and universal design, it's where we stop people from going to low income because as I mentioned, people get divorced. They have to move in with their relatives or
yeah.
whatever. And it's really the other side of the coin that no one's really talking about.
Yeah.
I appreciate you being here today.
No, of course. Yeah. I appreciate that. Learn a lot. It's a lot more to learn, I think, on it. And I think this is sort of the tip of the iceberg in the sense, but it's going to be for Maryland, at least a lot of where we work. This is not one-offs of it. You see it here and there, hear about it or certain things, but it's not a consistent sort of type of architecture standard that you see a lot. So it's going to be interesting to learn more.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool. I really appreciate you having me on. I enjoyed the questions were great. I enjoyed talking about this. It's a really interesting topic. Excited for it and to see how it goes. So,
Yep.
of course, thank you. Bye.
Bye. HorizontalHouses.com is the hub for all things related to disability home ownership. You will find my blog, this podcast, my book, and how my consulting services can help real estate agents or housing developers market and tap into the largest minority group, the disability community. Please help me continue this exploration of disability home ownership by connecting through my Facebook page. Remember, sharing our collective experiences will allow us each to lower the kitchen sink but raise the bar for disability home ownership. Thank you.